There's a lot to love in Bioshock Infinite. Its setting is gorgeous with its city and sky bright colors, and the story remains incredibly interesting throughout, with twists and ideas. However, Bioshock Infinite's greatest strength is use of its primary character, Elizabeth. The game does everything it can to make the player like the character, not only through its story, but especially through its gameplay. The player's view of Elizabeth is meant to parallel that of the player character, Booker DeWitt's. Upon beginning the game, the only thing DeWitt, and by extension player, hear about her are
Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt!
Elizabeth begins pretty dehumanized. DeWitt only sees her as a means to an end, lunching and taking shady people in order to serve his own ends. To the player, she is merely an objective marker that must be reached to continue the game. However, this quickly changes. Curiosity about her is created by her mysterious powers to bend space. When the player helps her escape the tower, Elizabeth starts to be a likable character and also shows her usefulness. During combat, she'll throw player health packs, figures, and ammo when the player is low on these things, creating the sense of her saving you just in time. The player can also ever use her powers to help, such as spawning turrets. Booker the character depends on Elizabeth narratively, but the player also depends on Elizabeth through the mechanics. Elizabeth is always running ahead of the player, not only conveying her eagerness, but also constantly keeping her in frame, reminding the player of her presence. The game is also filled with locked doors which the player needs to call Elizabeth over to unlock. This reminds the player of her presence and causes the player to value her, while also providing a reward for exploration in the form of lockpicks. The game is also careful to ensure she doesn't feel like a burden. Her running ahead of the player ensures that they never have to wait on her, unlike many annoying escort missions in other games. She's also invincible, so the player never has to worry about her during combat. During the game, the player is shown 2 necklaces for Elizabeth to wear, either a cage or a bird, with her wearing whichever the player picks for the rest of the game. While a small detail, it causes the player to become invested in Elizabeth and provides a sense of ownership or of at least some part of her person. As the player continues to play the game, they see Elizabeth less as a character in an escort mission, more as a likable character in her own right. When she runs away, the player doesn't just chase after her merely because they need her for the game to progress, they actively want to see more of her. This reaction from the player parallels to its transformation, starting to want to care more about getting Elizabeth to Paris than wiping away the debt. This all culminates in Elizabeth being kidnapped by the antagonist of the game, Zachary Comstock. The character is sad, but the player is also saddened by the event since they have spent most of the game becoming invested in this person. In addition, they also feel bad mechanically. The game becomes noticeably more difficult as the player no longer has any of Elizabeth's powers or toss items to rely on. The increase in difficulty causes the player to feel worse about her mechanically, and contrast this against the relief felt when Elizabeth does return. New enemies appear called the Boys of Silence, which summons bullet sponge enemies that eat away at the player's ammo supply. This is especially important since ammo is now far more precious as the player no longer has Elizabeth to supply them running run low. Ammo sources are especially scarce in this level, and there are no vending machines selling ammo. The Boys of Silence also emphasize stealth, as they have visible view cones, sneaking past them is far more efficient than dumping bullets and taking damage. The stealth communicates a feeling of disempowerment and weakness, emphasizing how much weaker the player is without Elizabeth. This is emphasized even more heavily in the horror environment itself. The rooms are dark, and insane asylums are a common trope in horror. The projectors are eerily silent, further communicating uneasiness. This feeling of disempowerment and uneasiness in the absence of Elizabeth is continued shortly before the player rescues her. The new armor guards are one of the toughest enemies in the game, further increasing contrast between this level and how much easier the game gets once Elizabeth is rescued. When Elizabeth is rescued, the game returns to its normal level of difficulty, and she once again helps the player even more, with the addition of being able to control Songbird during the final level. The narrative, with its many cutscenes, is frequently kept in a separate box of gameplay, with the two being viewed as wholly distinct and often looked at in isolation. This is a shame, as Bioshock Infinite shows how incredible a game can be when it uses its mechanics alongside its narrative to form a more cohesive and superior whole.